they created the sense that this was some part of a grand strategy. This is the first time since democracy that this municipality's financial status has been at this point.
I wonder when somebody's going to go to court to say stop using the term progressive movement when they actually want to do away with progress. Join us in supporting the Springboks when they take on the All Blacks at Ellis Park on the 31st of August 2024. We will be hosting exclusive hospitality at the Ellis Park Arena. Our hospitality includes pre-match analysis by international rugby players, lunch, drinks, Category A tickets inside the stadium so that you can enjoy the game right there. After the match, we're going to have live music, more food, more drinks, exclusive parking. What more could you want? If you want to join us and bring any size group, get more information below this video. Hi there, welcome back to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham, and just a reminder that the State of the Nation is brought to you by Pace Car Rental, keeping us going, and you're keeping us going by subscribing to the channel. And we want to stay on the news, and joining us today is one of South Africa's leading political commentators, all the way from the People's Republic of the Eastern Cape, Dr. Ongama Mtimka. Dr. Mtimka, welcome back to the State of the Nation.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you for having me.
I see that you've been all over on the news services, as all the political commentators have been very busy trying to unpack the news over the last week that was dominated by Floyd Shivambu's resignation from the EFF and his immediate move to the MK party. What do you make of it?
So initially, I wasn't quite keen to comment on this story, Mike, because I thought there was a lot of detail that was not in the public domain. And, there were a lot of layers to the story in terms of what really is happening. And it was only yesterday, actually, when I started to be a lot more confident that I could speak after Julius Malema's presser, which I think politically was unfortunate for him and the EFF, but I think it served to kind of narrow down the range of issues to be about internal strife within the EFF that's actually caused Floyd Shivambu to leave. You remember when they announced this last week, they created the sense that this was some part of a grand strategy to acquire or influence MK party so that too could be brought within the influence of the EFF, as part of some grand scheme to consolidate the so-called leftist agenda in South Africa. And it proved yesterday from Julius Malema's presser that it's anything but some grand strategy. These leaders have had a huge fallout between them. And this is an exit, which maybe from Floyd's perspective is a stop loss, move rather than some grand strategy to consolidate the leftist bloc in South Africa.
So the idea of somebody playing chess may not be the case. This is just pure acrimony by the looks of things.
Yeah, it does. It looks like it's pure acrimony. And in fact, since the presser, the attacks on Floyd Shivambu have kind of escalated. By the way, it's not that many of us had accepted that this was the explanation as to what is happening. There's been a lot of brewing tensions within the EFF, demonstrated, among other things, by Julius Malema's tirade, I think during the 2023, one of the gala dinners, when he, reasserted his authority and said that he was in charge in the EFF and people shouldn't attempt to, schemingly engage with an intention to depose him at the next conference, because that's going to trigger his most vicious aspects, and he's never lost a conference. You know, that rant that we've seen, it was a sign to me, or to many of us, that things went quite rosy in the EFF leadership circles. And there were those rumors also that, this being an election year, Marshall Dlamini was being lobbied to campaign to depose Floyd Shivambu. So there's been quite a lot that's been happening. Also, there's the VBS saga, which has revealed in more direct ways how the two, Julius Malema and Floyd, were allegedly involved in initiating the monies that Polly van Wyk went on to trace and link to their families. So one way or another, there needed to be some movements within the higher echelons of leadership in the EFF.
And I mean, that threat that came out at the end of last year was quite bizarre, certainly from afar, because up until that point, it looked like the Siamese twins were had this great bromance, and it looked like a two-hander, the EFF. The one couldn't do without the other. And Julius Malema attacking those near to him was quite a strange move, wasn't it?
It was quite strange, especially for many who didn't have knowledge of the inner workings of the EFF and the ructions leading up to this conference later this year. But I mean, if we look at Julius Malema, he has been dictatorial. He's had instances where he's publicly embarrassed Floyd Shivambu. We've seen videos or people pulling out videos from the files where Julius Malema, either in a meeting with King Buelekaya Dalingebo, pushing away Floyd Shivambu's hand, and in many other events where, Julius made it a point that the other leaders in the EFF were marginalized. He'd be the only one addressing media briefings, and he's had a tight grip, really, on the EFF. Now, among some of the concerns that have been raised were that Julius Malema didn't like the position that the deputy president had in processes of deployment since the EFF got into government after 2018, I think, when they got into some municipalities, that Floyd was central in these processes of deployment. So it was no surprise that yesterday, for example, he summarily dismissed people in the structure that was responsible for these deployments, and consolidated all the powers that were in the deputy president's office to himself. And that shows that what people were suspecting, that Julius was anxious and in fact jealous about some of the powers that were concentrated on the deputy president's office, and concerned that they positioned Floyd in a powerful position within the rank and file of the EFF, did have some credence based on what he then did yesterday in summarily concentrating those powers to himself and dismissing the committee.
So, Ongama, let's look at the effect that this is going to have on the EFF. Up until now, they've had this big show of discipline. It's now starting to look a bit dictatorial, losing the skills of Floyd Shivambu, who, by all accounts, did some things which, depending on which side of the coin that sort of lands, was good for the organization of the party. There's also been the sort of quiet sidelining of the Ice Boy and Blozi. It only seems to be Marshall Dlamini who's come to the fore, but there's no doubt Julius Malema remains a charismatic guy with the following. Go ahead.
So, yeah, look, he does remain a charismatic guy, no doubt about that, but his chauvinism, his dictatorship is not going to be tolerated long by the people within the EFF. Even the lobbying, or the reported lobbying, of Floyd Shivambu to challenge Julius Malema has to do with the character, with his character, Julius, in the sense that that whole hardline approach to fundraising for the party, people sacrificing their incomes for the party. These are people who needed the money. I mean, if you work in South Africa, you're a politician, you earn some income, you've got family, and you have responsibilities with your money, especially given our high dependency ratio. So those people who were campaigning and lobbying Floyd some of them have got personal grievances with Julius Malema's style of leadership and his very bossy approach. So those things will remain in the EFF. You will have this residual support base that is not, in favor of his style of leadership. A lot of them are going to go. And for that reason, I suspect that the EFF's national average in the next election could just drop to below 6%, what it had in its first elections, because of the impact that this departure of Floyd Shivambu will have on the party. Short-lived parties or small parties have got the problem of not generally surviving leadership successions or elective conferences, because of the tendency of those conferences to be divisive when it comes to leadership, because they get trapped in the founders syndrome. And what Floyd Shivambu is doing, among other things, is to avoid a Shilema situation in the same way that Cope had the Shikota moment.
Yeah, and nothing proved the dictatorial style of Julius Malema more than the handling of the Naledi Cherwa situation, which I thought was disgraceful. That you did have an activist who, really basically lost her job because she sent the letter to the wrong person. It's ridiculous. And yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, now he's talking about how men should have control over what their wives like on social media by critiquing, and the suggestion is that this is Mabato Monso who's being criticized here, and an indirect swipe at Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, because people were showing a screen grab of how she liked Floyd's joining of MK Party. So he keeps making these chauvinistic mistakes in addition to the one that you've mentioned.
But of course, dictators is a word that swirls around, but we've had our fair share of dictators of parties that haven't necessarily tasted a lot of power. We've got Bantu Holomisa, who seems to want the party to die with him. Patricia de Lille, her party will probably die with her. Kenneth Meshwe. Boy, they're lining up, you don't see a great leadership structure around ATM party at Zungula or nothing. It's clearly a thing. And obviously, given Africa's dalliance with dictatorship, it's not something that's proved to be particularly popular in South Africa, is it?
It's interesting. It does seem popular among small parties, very small parties. You see, that's the reason, is that these parties are generally built around the persona of the founder and the leader. And as a result of that, two things happen. Either the general membership feels too dependent on the leader, or the leader himself or herself has no sense of, longevity for the party, but for themselves in SA, continuing to be relevant in SA politics. And the other question is the practical question of, at what point is an organization that is being founded ready for a leadership transition? Because the sweet spot for that transition is generally when the organization itself grows and becomes stronger, a stronger brand than the leader. Then that's the sweet spot for the transition. But what you will find is that generally the failures of organization building on the part of these leaders make these organizations to be subservient to them as personalities, and failing to grow to become organizations that can stand in their own right without the leader. And as a result of that, they struggle making that transition from being founder-led to being a properly organized organization. Now, strange enough, Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu had transitioned that critical phase. The EFF itself had a strong brand as a party, as much as the leaders themselves had a strong brand. And in fact, and in my view, it had reached that threshold in its growth where the leadership could actually vacate office, and the EFF as a brand could continue because it's been built around their persona, but it's assumed a character and a strong brand identity on its own also.
But the same, I suppose, could have been said about the Inkatha Freedom Party, the IFP, under Buthelezi. It resembled a party, it had structures, it had everything except that the leader didn't want to go. And eventually, God had to intervene. To me, I'm seeing a lot of similarities there.
Well, and in this case, your example about the UDM also, I mean, the general has built the brand, and I think that he had reached that time where he could actually leave, especially given the fact that you've got Ongama Mtimka, who have now assumed their own prominence and could actually take the party forward. But with respect to the other small parties, I think it's that tension between until when has how long is the organization catching up with the brand of the individual, so that a political transition could take place in terms of its leadership.
Yeah, I've made the point many times that these have become, you have a term for it in business. So it's called a lifestyle business. You own one shop, you're the manager, you're the owner, you live off the profits of that business, and it's called a lifestyle business, because that business funds your lifestyle, and when you die, the business will die with you. And I think many of our political structures have become lifestyle businesses for a leader or two. And, I think the best example that I can think of at the moment is the Good Party, Patricia de Lille. She's not about to get anybody else involved. As long as she gets a job, everything's fine. It seems to be that model that becomes quite a thing in a country like South Africa, where people don't necessarily come in there with other skills that they can apply outside of politics. But I do want to move the other side of that transaction, Floyd Shivambu going to the MK party, Umkhonto we Sizwe. And I had likened it in an analysis to something that happens a lot in business, where you need a new CEO of a company, so you go and headhunt a good deputy CEO from another company. Happens a lot in business. We saw it recently with Nedbank here in South Africa. They went and got a guy from the rival bank. It's something that happens a lot, where you go and get the number two from another organization to become the number one in your organization. What do you think the impact is going to be on Umkhonto we Sizwe with Floyd Shivambu leaving and Mzwanele Manye? I'm sure he's going to help the organizational structure a lot. What's your view on MK and their benefit from this whole situation?
So under the circumstances, it's the best political move for Floyd Shivambu in terms when judged on the basis of viability. I would argue that he could achieve a much greater outcome if he exited the EFF and perhaps even went back to the governing party, the ANC, the majority party, as it were. The reason why I say that is because, you see, in the MK party, the intentionality of the patron, if I can put it that way, to build an organization is still in doubt at the moment. Now, when you build an organization, you put all the mechanisms in place to have it survive beyond the whims of the ultimate leader, the patron in this case, Jacob Zuma. Now, how intentional he is about permitting the MK party to become an organization that is sustainable, that builds structures, is still in doubt, given how he has chopped and changed leaders at the whim in the recent few months that the party has been in existence. If he is assumed to be intentional about that, building, it could just work for them because Floyd Shivambu does come with experience as far as organization building is concerned. The next challenge after the intentions of former President Jacob Zuma is the internal contestations for space in the MK party as a new party. It's not going to be a strange phenomenon to see leaders jostling for positions, starting with Duduzile, for example. I think that she is not going to want to be on anybody's shadow. In her mind, in my view, she does see herself playing a very prominent role in MK party. And unless there has been clarity provided about what role is emerging for her or is envisaged for her, there's going to continue to be some trouble. And then you've got the spokesperson, Amulon Ndlela, who's also, becoming a person of interest, a person to watch in terms of what the party morphs into. And obviously, you've got those who are in the leadership structures of the party and those who've also assumed roles in the National Assembly as well as the various provincial legislatures, who would be seeking to vie for positions of significance in the MK party. So all of those dynamics are going to either enable Floyd to thrive or they are going to be constraining him, especially if he gets there and he's in doubt about how much power is accorded to him in order to build an organization that is sustainable.
The other part of this, which interests me, is that if one goes back into the archives of the youth league, the Julius Malema-led youth league days, when they had created a lot of interest, good and bad, within the ANC, it seemed like, as annoyed as President Zuma was at that point with Julius Malema, he really disliked Floyd Shivambu. He seemed to save his real vitriol for Floyd rather than Julius. That also has to play into it, because it doesn't seem like this was his long lost, sort of youth league leader. That spot seemed to be reserved, for anybody, for Julius Malema. He really didn't seem to like Floyd, and remember, he smacked him down quite hard at a conference and told him to shut up on stage. If you recall, there was a lot that went on. So this does seem very opportunistic, and opportunism seldom has a good outcome.
Yeah. So, as they say, there aren't permanent friends in politics. You're quite right. Zuma didn't take kindly to Floyd Shivambu yelling, "You're lying," when Zuma was trying to explain how the South African government had voted on that Gaddafi motion, or on that motion on Libya. And that was an embarrassing moment that had Zuma, on threatening mode as a response. And also during the first term of the EFF in office, when Zuma was still president, the relationship was fraught. But these leaders are opportunistic, as you say. They see political opportunities and would bury the hatchet and move on, when it comes to carving a new path. And that's why, for example, it's one thing to want to leverage a political moment. It's another to truly believe that this is the right jockey to bet on, and let's give him the space, because that's a heart issue. It's as much about a calculating mind as it is about a heart that feels safe and feels confident that you've got the right person who needs to be given space and they're going to be acting in the best interests of the organization.
So, just last word on this. What do you make of MK's tactic, or not, or is there just nothing that one can say about it? In appointing almost rogues gallery, it seems like a prerequisite that you've had a run-in with the law or the State Capture Commission, or you've got some kind of big mark next to your name. There almost seems to be nobody there that's renowned for good work. Everybody there seems to have a cloud that follows them.
Two things about that. One, their official line is that these are highly qualified people. That's the official line. But I think that what they're doing is to try and say to people who were casualties of power shifts in South Africa, and therefore, faced the might of the law or procedure or good governance or repercussions for their bad governance or allegedly bad governance. They are trying to say, here's a space for you so that your losses are not, you do not end up in a completely a losing position. I think that's what is at play here, but also to bring this coalition of the wounded so that they can, mount an attack against the sitting regime, because many of these leaders were casualties of the corrective measures that were undertaken after Zuma was gone.
Well, to the football players, they've got a retirement plan in that when you finish playing for the great clubs of Europe, you go and play in America, and, it's at half the speed. The rugby players go play rugby in Japan. I suppose for politicians that have been caught with their hands in the cookie jar, you go and join MK. That seems to be the way to go. It shouldn't be long before Zizi Kodwa joins MK. It seems like a brush with the law seems to be the next step to getting involved with MK. Ongama, the one thing we haven't discussed, you and I, and that is the government of national unity. And it sort of plays into this theme. That has now been established. It's in place. It's operational. What do you make of the government of national unity?
Yeah, so it's an interesting phenomenon. First of all, I was among the people that felt that the ANC's best card out of an election where it loses its support significantly below 50% would initially be to cobble together a coalition with the small parties. And this, by the way, is a scenario that South African markets had also factored in, assuming that the ANC was going to settle somewhere between 43 and 45%. That's why there were jitters in the markets when they dropped way below that, because it was accepted that in the early 40s, that's where the ANC was vulnerable to swings, either to the extreme left or to the extreme right. So that's why we saw the rallies in the rand and the concert, because the market had really factored in an ANC in the mid-45s. But what then became an emerging thought for me was that the ANC needed to play the card of a government of national unity as its way of attempting to carve a political path for South Africa, in terms of which it would not be perceived to be being swayed to the left or to the right. Obviously, we know that both the DA and the EFF pushed the ANC to choose to basically effectively choose sides and not be in the middle. And so there was a huge debate in the country about which coalition. And the tensions were between the so-called black progressive parties, ANC going with these parties or going with the Democratic Alliance as it was emerging in that week in which Parliament needed to sit. I was quite happy that the choice that the ANC needed to make was a choice that was in favor of potentially good governance and state building, rather than the so-called coalition of black parties. And the reason why I argued that point was that since 2007, this same coalition that was now being styled as the ultimate revolutionaries had deposed Mbeki and came into government in 2009. It had been in government, except that they disintegrated. And now the argument was being made that these people who couldn't remain together voted to kick out the Scorpions, were all of a sudden the ultimate revolutionaries. And I thought that this was exploitation of Black identity for a nefarious agenda that had nothing to do with Blackness. Yeah. What I thought was crucial as far as GNU was concerned was that it was an ANC-DA coalition that brings together the white voter bloc mostly and the black voter bloc was necessary because in South Africa we were getting into a time in which living apart with a facade of unity was going to urgently need to be a thing of the past. And so my view is that the GNU has started a process politically of bringing together the voting blocs, not just the politicians. And so what's going to be important is that they should remain together, continue to work. And I was very happy when they rejected the idea of having party-centric ministries, in terms of which you would have an ANC minister deputized by an ANC, deputy minister. I thought that was an idea which needed to be strongly rejected. I was happy when they rejected that idea. Now you have portfolios where it's collaborative, the ANC and the DA. I think that the acid test of it is going to be whether they can retain the coalition. And I don't want to run ahead of us now, but there are a lot of things that are happening at a subnational level that put a strain on this coalition. But so far, I commend how they seem unthreatened at a national level, notwithstanding some of the ructions that are happening below the surface.
Yeah, and certainly strain comes with the territory. I must admit, there's been a lot of commentary, and certainly amongst the politicians themselves, at every turn where there's a bit of strain to say that the coalition is under threat. Listen, you're going to have strain. You're going to have it in the best marriage in the world. There's going to be strains. That comes with the territory. That means something's actually happening. I've been fascinated by the MK going to court to stop the SABC from using the term Government of National Unity. I wonder when somebody's going to go to court to say stop using the term progressive movement when they actually want to do away with progress and take away your civil liberties. That to me is the opposite of progress. But hey, I'm just somebody that likes civil liberties. That's I don't see reverting back to traditional leaders is a sign of progress. But that's just me. Now, if one looks once again at the GNU, we were talking about these mixed ministries, and that certain areas are starting to work, but there is that disturbing pattern that's getting getting into the news, and it's becoming harder and harder to ignore. We're a couple of months in. We're seeing a lot of action out of the portfolios from the other parties that are in the cabinet. Those portfolios, not just the DA ones, but Gayton McKenzie, Peter Groenewald, in a different way. Some are using big media, others are just sort of getting on with their jobs. But what is striking is almost nothing out of the ANC-led ministries, barring for a groveling begging bowl visit by Parks Tau and quite an energetic electricity minister who does seem to have made a difference. What do you make of the ANC's performance in this Government of National Unity?
Yeah, so we have to be very careful about politicians. So a few things here. One, you see, when you are in something for a long time, you generally do not separate what should be what is taken for granted and what is special. Now, the ministers who are new to the portfolios are recognizing a lot of things which are the ordinary process of doing government work as special, because these are, they're still aware and attuned to what is really great, what's not. Now, there's the pushback against the Minister of Home Affairs, for example, around the issue of the efficiencies within Home Affairs. So there were changes, I think this was yesterday, changes that have been taking place for about 3 months. And the minister has been there for a month and was being called out on how he was claiming this to be a DA success when in fact it's part of the efficiencies that were building up over time. So politicians do this all the time. I used to work at Nelson Mandela Metro many years ago, and I mean, it was among the most financially stable municipalities up until 2011, where if it collected less than 98%, then that would be underperformance. So if collection rates were 96 or 97%. But I used to listen to the DA in 2016 when they came into power, saying that this is the first time since democracy that this municipality's financial status has been at this point. And I would think, no, actually, the records are there that show where the financial state of this municipality was, if you would care to look longer than 5 years. So politicians, what they say, their publicity stunts need to be looked at with a pinch of salt. Yes, indeed, what I enjoyed about, for example, with Home Affairs, were decisions taken to stop processes that were not in good faith for the country, to move decisively as far as the corruption around visa allocations and all of those things. Those were, I think, credit must be given where it's due. But a lot of the credit that's being claimed is credit of the ordinary work of government. Now, with respect to ANC ministers, because they've been embroiled, they've been in the processes, a lot of them wouldn't see the opportunity to say this is something to go to the media about as the success of this administration. So I think what we are seeing is competition and poor communication as far as a lot of the portfolios than evidence of quick turnarounds. Government is such a huge beast, and the administrative processes that take place there are huge for turnarounds that are claimed in such a short period of time. Am I positive about the ministries that these new parties are running? Absolutely, and I think that they, in fact, have the potential to outshine the ANC that has been trapped in politics of incumbency. But for now, I think we're seeing evidence of effective communication from a group of politicians that's just arrived, compared to groups of politicians that takes a lot of things for granted and sees and misses opportunities to communicate.
Yeah, I see the difference as being two things. One is responsiveness and the other is communication, both of which the ANC seem to have completely missed the boat, and that is, you know that there's a scandal, everybody is unhappy about this particular issue, or this particular issue is very important, even important, frivolous, doesn't matter, but you want a comment from a minister. And the South African way was, we're examining the records, it's sub judice, we'll come back to you. They never do. There's no communication. And I suppose the difference has been the willingness of these ministers to actually communicate and to respond. Even if one takes the situation of the young lady in the Miss South Africa competition, the ministers involved responded. Whether you liked their response or not, at least you knew what they were thinking, rather than burying it under bureaucracy.
So about that, check who has been in trouble now for communication, for that very same responsiveness. It's at least two ministers for now, Gayton McKenzie, for communicating out of tune. And I mean, look at, for example, the exposés around COVID funding. On one level, it's good. On another level, for me, it shows very limited understanding of the role of the state in the economy and the sensitivities about government communication, in my view, okay? Because where things have gone wrong from a publicity point of view is in the various portfolios that are out there in the public domain. If you go back also, I mean, what I really enjoyed about Dean McPherson when he got into office, said, okay, well, let's make sure that government buildings are being used a lot more so that you can save the state a lot of money. In the Eastern Cape, Babalo Matikizela was the MEC of Public Works, had in his tenure, I think, reported decline of about 450 million, if I remember well, or thereabout, in terms of 45%, in terms of the public expenditure on buildings because of the rehabilitation and refurbishing of government buildings and stopping rentals. Okay, so that was on one level. And then you had government, I think about 3 weeks ago, going on tender looking for office space from private developers. So that inevitably happens if you I mean, the principle was really great, that you communicate promptly about the need to stop some buildings. But as soon as you think about government business and all the intricacies of providing office space, and then you are compelled now to do things where some aspects of it may be contrary to what you quickly communicated. So what I'm saying is that there is really space for effective prompt communication, but we must understand all the intricacies of government, which actually compel ministers to apply themselves to all the tensions before they go out and communicate some issues. So, but my view is that, and in fact, if you follow the social media debates, there were discussions that, you know what, it's going to be important for GCIS to actually also conduct an induction with these new ministers on government communication protocols, even if it's not going to completely curb that responsiveness and being open to engage with the public.
Or here's an idea: scrap the GCIS, because what role is it serving other than to serve as the, call it, propaganda mouthpiece between the minister and the people who pay his salary? You know, you want to know there's a problem here. It's in the public domain. Surely those ministers read the newspapers or watch podcasts like ours and know what people are unhappy about and respond to it, you know, rather than having GCIS saying, actually, hang on a second, there's a protocol here. It's going to take us, 3 or 4 weeks to work through the protocol before we come back to you on this issue that's out in the public domain now. And let the ministers respond.
Yeah, control measures, their logic sometimes is not appreciated until the proverbial hits the fan and government is being sued. You know what I mean? You find, for example, let's look at the issue of land invasions. Okay, politician comes very passionate, compels people to go dismantle people's shacks because they are invading land, and this is a passionate thing to do, only to find that processes of removing people that are invading land are guided by protocols of human rights and all of those things. And now government gets sued as a result of a courageous and bold leadership, but that's not informed by what the risk management protocols should be. So there's a place for both a very effective and a responsive communication style from ministers. There's a place also for careful application of the rules so that government doesn't get sued.
Yeah, but it's an interesting time, a lot of dynamics. We haven't even touched on provincial governance, local governance. All of these are being affected by what happened in May in the general election. And then, ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you that I got Dr. Mtimka onto the show under false pretenses, because I actually approached him because he's come out with a fascinating part of his thesis on mafias, construction mafias and so on. And, that's a wonderful topic that needs to be discussed, but there's some hot news and we haven't spoken to him. We were fortunate enough to do a couple of events before the election, so we knew what we were thinking before the election. It's the first occasion to get your view on what's happened subsequent to the elections, and of course we had the news within the EFF and MK. So we have sadly run out of time. We're going to have to bank the discussion around mafias. We'll set that up soon enough. Thank you so much for joining us from the Eastern Cape, Dr. Ongama Mtimka, and to everybody that watched us today. Thank you so much for joining us on the State of the Nation. Support Pace Car Rental. Get a discount by renting a car. And we'll see you all again on the State of the Nation. Dr. Mtimka, thank you very much.